Hello and welcome to Overcome, a mental health podcast. I'm your host, Travis White. This is a place for you to share your mental health stories. And I'm very excited to be speaking with William Spears tonight. William is a submarine warfare officer, author, and military philosopher. William writes about leadership, philosophy, ethics, and the morality of war. William, welcome to the show.
Hey, Travis, I'm really glad to be here. Thanks.
The pleasure's all mine. I'm excited for our conversation. So without wasting any more time, I'm just going to turn the microphone over to you.
Yeah, sure. So I am a submarine officer, as Travis said. So I joined the Navy right out of high school. I enlisted, as just a guy from small town Louisiana without really a plan to get to an education. And whenever I joined the Navy, my parents said, "Hey, this will be good for you but just make sure that if they offer you school, you take it. And if they don't, then you seek it, but basically try to get as much school as you can." And so that was kind of my mantra throughout. And so I enlisted into the nuclear propulsion program to learn how to be a technician on nuclear powered ships. I trained as an electrician, and before I made it to a ship, I was offered to go to the United States Naval Academy and commission as an officer. And so I took that path and majored in mechanical engineering, so I could go back into nuclear power and go back into submarines. And that's where I've been since. And so I've done a career in submarines. I was a weapons officer on an attack submarine. I've served on two attack submarines and one ballistic missile submarine. My most recent sea tour was as the executive officer, second in command of a ballistic missile submarine. And I'm kind of in between right now. I'm working at the Pentagon. You do a rotation where you spend some time on a ship and some time ashore, in like an office or something like that. So right now I'm working at the Pentagon doing financial stuff, looking at how expensive ships are. Turns out they're expensive. Who knew? You and I'm hoping, next year I'll go back into the training pipeline to go be a captain, and hopefully I'll go be a commanding officer for a submarine. Who knows? And there's a million things that could happen to prevent that from happening, but that's the plan right now. And so that's where I'm at. That's kind of what I do as a hobby, as kind of a outlet. I've always been a writer. And over the past, decade, I've devoted myself to writing philosophy, writing on philosophy specifically, and specifically on. I published a book recently on the Stoic philosophy and how it plays into the morality of warfare. And it has a lot of adjacency with mental health, which is kind of why I'm here on your show. But that's a book that's out right now, and it's a hot topic right now. It's very interesting to me and to, I think, a lot of people. And so that's kind of my deal. That's what's going on with me right now.
Awesome. I love it. And first question, what first drew you to Stoicism and when did you realize it had real world relevance to the military environment?
Well, I came across it while I was a student at the Naval Academy, like circa 2004 or so, and there's kind of like an undercurrent of Stoicism there. It's always been popular there, owing largely to a famous admiral named Vice Admiral Stockdale, who is he's a heroic figure, and he's a very interesting character. You could do a whole other podcast show on him, but he was a hero of mine, and he was deeply read in the Stoics, and he wrote and spoke a lot about that in his later years, and that was like in the 70s, you know but his writings are something I came across when I was a student there, and I was kind of like, oh, this is holy crap, this is how I think about stuff anyway. And it has a lot to do with coping strategies and dealing with stress, and maintaining your moral identity in a environment that seeks to compromise it, and very relevant to his situation whenever he was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. But it also, whenever you're in a military academy, and just trying to survive that environment, the that same philosophy that helped the guy get through prison feels really relevant. Maybe for reasons that are kind of silly in retrospect, but stress is stress, and philosophy is it's evergreen, and it applies to many situations in life for very valid reasons. So anyway, that's kind of where I came into it, and I went off into the submarine world kind of when I graduated 2008 era and didn't really think that much about philosophy anymore. I kind of thought I got it. And then I spent a few years on a submarine. And when you're doing that, you don't really engage a lot with pop culture. And then whenever I came to shore duty again from there, I, you know, that I started like I was writing on leadership and leader development and things like that, and I came across a Stoic blog, and I discovered that there was this whole like Stoic blogosphere, and there's this whole thing where all of a sudden everyone is a Stoic, and I'm like, what the hell is this, and so that's kind of what inspired me of like, oh, like maybe I should write about this. I like writing about things, and I think that there's a lot of material there. There's a lot to do with investigating kind of the intersection of the morality of warfare and the stoic outlook on moral virtue. And so that's kind of what the book's about.
That's really cool. And I can see how it would pertain to, you know, being in a submarine and kind of that isolation and trying to work through all those emotions.
Yeah. And just how unhelpful emotions can be in that situation.
Yeah.
But it's not about suppressing emotions. It's about just having the right ones.
Yes. So from what I know about Stoicism, and I know that some people misunderstand it and kind of perceive it as emotionless. How do you explain the difference between suppression and discipline?
Yeah. Well, so that's tough. Like I like to push back a little bit about the whole people say, "Oh, well, we would never suppress our emotions." That no. Like we got to be in touch with our emotions. Men should be really excited to cry and hug and stuff. And I'm like, well, maybe not all the time. If I'm
All situational, yeah.
yeah. If I'm giving orders on the con of a submarine and, something frustrates me or something, upsets me or something like that, it's not a good time to start crying. Is that suppressing my emotions to like maybe I deal with that a different time, you know?
Uh-huh.
So anyway, the underlying idea, the basic idea of stoicism that as pertains to emotions is recognizing an underlying judgment. And this is a very old idea. And it's not 100% perfect. And a lot of psychologists today will say like, well, we know that emotions are more complex than a specific judgment call. Like, okay, roger that, but the ancient philosophy and the way that the ancient philosophers looked at this thing has a lot of utility and a lot of applicability and approaching the way that we have an emotion and the path of reasoning that got us there, or non-reasoning, the path of reasoning that can potentially help us deal with it appropriately. So the basic idea that the Stoics had 2,000 years ago is that an emotion, whatever it is, represents some sort of judgment call. I receive an impression that something has happened to me. Someone said an insulting thing about me in a meeting, and tried to make me look bad in front of the boss, you know, and I'm upset about that. Well, the the underlying judgment is that I've been harmed in some way. And if I analyze that, I realize I have not been harmed in any way. There was just noises, just air coming out of this guy's mouth and didn't harm me in any way. And, okay, so maybe the boss does think more poorly of me. Okay, why do I care about that? what what is the underlying, cause of my concern about what the boss thinks about me. And the core concept of stoicism, the keystone that kind of it all turns upon is the idea that virtue is what is good. Virtue is what matters. And if it's not virtue, then it's ultimately irrelevant. And lots of things get swept up into that irrelevant or what they would call indifference. That includes things like wealth, status, including what my boss thinks of me, my rank, my uniform. These things are costumes. These things are not really me. And they can be taken away at any moment by powers external to me. And if it's not something that is subject to my own choice, my own will, then it's ultimately irrelevant. It doesn't reflect on my virtue. And it is irrelevant explicitly because it does not express my virtue. That is the connection to virtue, is there to these ideas of how I should interpret impressions and what emotions I should assent to and which emotions I should recognize are basically the expressions of some falsehood or some false belief. But that's the underlying idea.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool the way you explained it, relating it back to virtue, actually made it a few things in my head clear up about it because it's like I said before we started recording that I'm familiar with the term and a couple of guests have brought up the word before, but it's never been explained in that way.
Yeah, and one of the things I have to be careful about. So this is it's a popular movement right now. If you
Yeah,
type in Stoicism, it's going to blow up. It's all over the blogosphere and all this stuff. It's very easy to be a snob about it, especially when you know something about something, you've studied it for a long time. It's very easy to say, oh well, all these people, they're misrepresenting the ideas, they're cheapening it or whatever. And I really try not to do that. Because it's really like it's like week two of clicking around Stoic blogs that you get your card in the mail that allows you to judge everyone else and say that they're misinterpreting it. And if you really read the Stoics like I do, you would see that they agree with me about everything. And that's not really my game. My thing is to say like, okay, well, this is what they said. These people lived before electricity, so they were probably wrong about some stuff, but what do you think? That's the important thing. At the
hmm
end of the day, that's how philosophy works. It's not religion. It's not going and adopting this idea, or this set of ideas because somebody said it. Like, these people, they're not prophets. They're not magical, they're not holy, they're just dudes.
yeah,
And they're feeling around in the dark trying to figure things out. But the ideas that come to us today, we still talk about them because they cut to the core of what it means to be a human.
yeah,
It's the same reason we still study Shakespeare in high school, is because the things that he's writing about, cut through time and are, irrespective of an era. And it's the same reason that people say that, like, oh, classic rock is so much better than the music on the radio today. Well, there was a lot of crappy music being put out back then too. We just don't listen to it anymore. Same idea.
and my thought is if it's something that we're still talking about, and it happened 2,000 years ago, obviously they were doing something that worked.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that kind of cuts like way over to the adjacency to mental health. One of the things that I think is very fascinating and is kind of undersold in a lot of the popular Stoicism discussion is the interplay of Stoic philosophy, not just philosophy writ large, but Stoic philosophy specifically, and the development of certain therapeutic techniques, specifically cognitive behavioral therapy and rational emotive behavioral therapy. I am not a psychologist, I'm a I'm a submarine guy, but what I have read into this is that basically the guys that developed those therapies that are basically considered the gold standard of psychotherapy today were deeply read in the Stoics, and they specifically adapted a lot of what were just mental practices that the Stoics, just believed you should think about things. So what are many of what are today modern interventions or therapies are, are techniques that psychologists will teach you are kind of refinements of the way Stoics just thought about stuff or tried to think about stuff or tried to teach one another to think about stuff. And it's not to say that, Stoic philosophy is a replacement for therapy. It certainly isn't. But one of the key goals of therapy is to teach you techniques that you can take with you such that you don't depend on a therapist to help you out. Teach you techniques to self-manage and to reason through things. And these were the techniques that the Stoics were working with, or their adaptations of it. The Stoics were working with thousands of years ago. So it's more like a natural cure. It's kind of like uh, you know, humans discovered that you could chew on the bark of a willow tree and it would cure a headache. They had no idea why. I don't know how many different trees they chewed the bark of to figure that out, but they figured it out long before we figured out that the active ingredient is salicylic acid, which can be synthesized into aspirin. That was discovered relatively recently. And so that's kind of, I think that's a good analogy. We also understood winemaking long before we had any idea what was happening with fermentation or anyone discovered a microscope. We just knew that, this makes wine if you do this with juice. So I think that that's a key component I think that's a key component of why Stoicism is exploding in popularity right now, because you have a mental health crisis in this country. That you've got kind of an environment that's really corrosive to mental health, that people are like looking for adaptations, and it's one of them that kind of works.
Yeah, I agree. But and basically stole the words out of my mouth. And it was like some of the stuff that you mentioned, like who goes and tries to chew on different bark of a tree to see if it helps with the headache. Like who does some of this stuff? Like I was
Yeah,
talking,
when you got
you just
thousands of years to to find the
yeah.
answers.
It's funny that you mentioned something like that because I was like, I can't remember. It just reminded me of a conversation I had recently with my wife, and I can't even remember what it was about, but it was that kind of the same concept. It's like who thought of this? Like who
Yeah,
actually sat down and tried this to see if it worked?
yeah. So somebody did. God bless that person
Exactly.
for chewing on the bark of different trees and figuring it
And
out.
figuring out and helping the rest of us out.
Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of change the direction here a little bit. What are some of the unique mental health challenges of operating inside a nuclear submarine for months at a time?
So it's not surprisingly, it's not claustrophobia is not the thing that gets most people. It's usually just the stress of just the workload. Honestly, I get asked a lot of like, "Hey, do you have people like lose it? They get underwater and they realize that they're claustrophobic." And it's usually not that. You do have the occasional person that doesn't adapt, and you work with people, and whenever you're ashore, you get them to therapy. And if you find if you don't find things like that before you get to sea, and you get to sea, and then somebody is unable to adapt emotionally to the environment, then basically you separate them from responsibilities, that you make sure that they can't harm themselves or others, and you find a way to get them off the ship whenever an opportunity presents itself. It doesn't happen that often, that dramatically. More often the case, it becomes the case like the workload is very hard whenever you're in port as well, and so someone's not going to make it. That often is figured out before the ship goes to sea, and that's what you want. But the reality is, like, a lot of people think they're not gonna make it, and then they discover they're capable of a lot more than they thought they were, and that's actually a beautiful sight to see, is people realizing that they were capable more than they thought they would be. But as to the specific challenges, what you actually asked there, it's the stress, it's the workload, it's the pressure of, I've gotta learn all this stuff and do all this work, and I'm responsible for all these other people. Everyone is depending on everybody. Everyone's looking at me to know, everyone's expecting me to know what to do no matter the emergency, because everyone's got to know what to do. And if people don't know what to do, that's catastrophic, you know? And so that level of stress just is what wears a lot of people down. You don't have a lot of time to think about, geez, I'd like to go outside and those things. But if you ruminate on that, that can absolutely drive you up a wall, because you're not going outside.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the part that I'd have a hard time with is the not being able to go outside.
Yeah, and I tell you, that's somewhere where Stoicism, really applies, or really has for me. Whenever the ship first submerges, whenever you first go to sea, it's typically an officer. It's typically a junior officer that what you is there is like the last one to shut the hatch, and to verify all the valves are in the right position. It's just kind of part of the procedure that you have a junior officer do that usually. And when that last like sliver of sunlight disappears, you're like, I'm not going to feel that sunlight on my skin for like a couple of months maybe. And now you're down below and you're in a machine. You're like, okay, I'm in this machine. This is where I am, and I am not going outside. you know? That I mean that is a major suspension of control. And if you ruminate on that, you can very quickly find yourself adrift in someone else's plan and feel like you're imprisoned or something like that. But within the fact that, I am here, there is I've got a job to do. And within that, that is what I must do. I must do my job. And that becomes a very excellent focal point. And my job is really like 100 jobs. It's all the stuff I've got to learn. It's the people I'm responsible for. It's the maintenance I've got to perform. The planning I've got to do, the training I've got to do. It's the watch I've got to stand. It's tons and tons of stuff, and that overwhelms some people. But if you focus on the work, that helps you get through it, and that is what has worked for me. And there's pieces of that are kind of screwed up. Like I find that, and this is just me, this is not everybody, but I find that I'm better off if I'm not looking at pictures of my family all the time, because it makes me sad. If
Hmm.
instead I just kind of like, and this is just, I don't recommend this to anybody. Like, this is just my own personal thing. But like, if I focus on the job, then I'm busy, and then I don't have time to ruminate on all
Hmm.
these things that are probably going to make me very sad if I think about it for too long. So, but that's an example. I think the hardest thing for me personally is not knowing that my family's okay. Because once you're underwater, you very quickly, as soon as the ship's into a situation where you're doing anything interesting, you shut off communications. And that's, if you're going to send a ship to sea, a submarine to sea, you're probably doing it for a reason, and you're probably going to lose communications very quickly. And at that point, you go for a long period of time without receiving or sending any kind of email, any kind of update on the family. And in that case, I just kind of have to have faith that they'll be all right.
Yeah.
And as soon as we come back in comms, I want to know, the first thing I want to know is like, hey honey, are you all right? Are the kids all right? That's all I care about. Okay. After that, like, I don't care, house burned down, whatever, you're all right, the kids all right, okay, good. That's what I want to know. And so far, everything's been okay. The house has not burned down.
Well, that's good. And I can only imagine though, like cutting off that communication. Um, does that cause like a lot of like isolation, and does that add on to the stress that you deal
Well,
with?
there are a couple of ironies there, and a couple of idiosyncrasies you might not think about. One of the things is that whenever you cut off the communications, the email doesn't necessarily come in the order that it was sent, because it piles up in this buffer somewhere. And so sometimes, like, the most recently sent is what you get first. And so back when I was a weapons officer, I found out that we were going to have a boy before I found out that we were pregnant. It's like, hey, what do you know? It's going to be a boy. I hope it's mine. Oh yeah, it is mine. All right. There was never any doubt there, but it's a funny joke.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, that some of the ironies are some of the stressors of everyday life that disappear and that I personally don't miss, such as social media and the news cycle. you know, and whenever you find out that you can live without constantly checking, Instagram or whatever your addiction is today. It's gonna change every couple of years, but there's always going to be some newer, more addictive doom scrolling service. And the fact that you can live without it, you suddenly are like, oh wait, I have to interact with these people that are near me, and I guess we're going to have to play cards to entertain ourselves like normal people. And I find that is a very kind of forced detox from a lot of the mental health stressors that are out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think getting rid of social media or not being on it for days at a time could help all of us out.
Absolutely, and we all know it.
Yeah.
It's not. I mean, it's like cigarettes. Like, we know it's bad for us. We just do it because we
Yes.
like it. You
I'm
know.
I'm completely guilty. It's like my wife will be like, "Put down your phone, like you're around the kids now." And I'm trying to do better. It's like we all know we have a phone addiction problem,
Yeah.
but how many of us are actually willing to put it down and step away for a few hours a night?
You gotta fight the good fight, man. It's like whatever you can do, the little things. It's a never ending battle. It's like the same battle with junk food. Like, you can't just give up.
Mhm.
You gotta do whatever you can do to fight the good fight. But it's better for you. Promise.
Yes.
I promise. Reddit or TikTok or whatever the addiction is, it's gonna be there tomorrow. It'll be all right.
Yeah, my biggest problem is probably Instagram and looking up music.
Yeah. I haven't, like, learned how to why Instagram is fun yet. I guess I'm old, but I'm, promoting a book, you're supposed to get in all this social media stuff, and I'm like, I feel like an old man. I'm like, I don't why do the kids like this? I don't know,
I'm still trying to figure it out, trying
yeah,
to promote the podcast. It's like there's times where it's like do really well, like and very consistent posting, and then there's times where you've outseen me for like a month, and it's like you can
yeah,
tell clearly when I've given up a little bit.
and I mean, who knows what's gonna resonate with people.
Exactly.
Mine is Reddit. Reddit is such an addiction, and it's totally an addiction. And I try to, rationalize it like, oh, I need to go on here to see what people are saying about. Like, no, no, I don't. What are you talking about? Life's gonna go read a book. You know, I could write a book, but I can't read one anymore. I don't have the attention span.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to dive into back into reading books.
Yeah, where I'm finding success there, and we're so far off of our topic, it's great. The where I find success there now is treating reading for pleasure not like a pleasure, but treating it like working out. Like, I've got to do this.
Yeah,
I've got to read X chapters a week, and if I don't, I'm gonna have to read more chapters the next week to make up for my laziness. And that's the same approach to working out. Like, I really don't want to work out today, but if I don't, I'm gonna have to pay for it later. So, and like that's just how I do it. And some like so instead of reading for pleasure, it's like I'm reading for macho. I need to do this to prove that I can, and that's working for me now. But, maybe I just hate this book.
it could be it too. Could be it.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway,
So, are there any methods that you use to personally manage your stress?
I mean, well, aside from staying busy, there's working out. If I don't work out 4 times a week, I'll start to feel I'll just be upset and be basically frustrated with myself about that. But I find finding excuses to interact with other people goes a really long way. And so kind of the tradition in a submarine, in the wardroom, which is where the officers hang out, is to play a card game. Cribbage is the game, and it's a stupid game. Don't tell any other submariners I said that, but it's a ridiculous game, but it's a this like really serious submarine tradition that submariners are just really into cribbage. And and I'm like, okay, fine, we'll play cribbage. But what it is it's an excuse to sit around and BS and just talk about something that isn't work. And whenever you're just overwhelmed with work all the time, there's always more work to do than you feel like you've got time to do it. And so if you allow yourself, that's just going to consume you. And that's all you will ever think about, all you'll ever talk about. And so if you say like, no, no, we're playing cribbage right now. We're playing cribbage, sit down, then it just kind of forces people to relax a little bit, and you can interact and get to know people a bit and say, hey, when was the last time you heard from the wife and the kids? What's going on? And the having interactions, just normal interactions and treating one another normally, is just really goes a long way, I find. Even if you don't talk about those things that are stressing you, just talking period and socializing with another human being face to face is really important there. I think it really helps out in just that kind of corrosive environment. If you just kind of push all that away and just say, hey, we're actually just humans here. That's just we just happen to be in this place.
Yeah, I think that's important though with like any team that you're on, and it's if you don't build those relationships like that, like I don't feel like your team can necessarily always be a team.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's all about the team. Like the entire everything you do is a function of the team. It doesn't matter how good you are as an individual. It's not going to matter the least bit. Yeah.
So, how do you balance strict discipline with empathy when leading high performance teams?
Well, the key is that has worked for me, and different leaders are gonna find different things work for them better. But is embracing, it's kind of a thing of our culture. It's a part of our culture that we we're always focusing on what's wrong and like what we did wrong. And we really just, we're not into hugging and saying like, oh, well, here's all the things that went right, in that last watch. Like, no, that's a waste of time. We're going to focus on what you screwed up and what I screwed up. And we're going to flog ourselves. I'm going to flog me and I'm going to flog you. And we're all going to flog each other. And that's just that's how submariners approach anything, because you got to be constantly improving, and whether it's, the formality and the proceduralism with which I stood a watch, or it's how I maintained this particular piece of reactor instrumentation or whatever, we're always going to investigate and find everything that went wrong. I think embracing that and talking to the crew a lot about why we do it that way and recognizing that we're going to screw stuff up. And I'm not saying it's okay. I'm saying it's expected that these things are going to happen, and how we deal with them when they do is part of our evaluation, our self-evaluation. So how we handle that, you know, feeling of failure and not wallowing in it, but instead of isolating what failed, what I did wrong, what do I have to correct and how I'm going to correct it dispassionately, and learning to take pride in my ability to do that and in one another's ability to do that. And what, nirvana is whenever you've got a team where I can say, hey Jim, that really sucked when you did that. Misidentified that sonar trace as a biologic when in fact it was a merchant ship. That sucked. And Jim can say like, yep, that sucked. Here's why I did that. And here's how I'm going to do it. And the future differently. I'm like, roger that. Excellent. Awesome. Okay. Moving forward. and like, we're not mad at each other, and we're not, Jim's not flogging himself, crying in his beer. He's moving on with life, and he's correcting and getting better. Learning how to embrace that self-correcting culture and develop that self-correcting culture and be happy that you have it, because you recognize how vital it is for your life,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to embrace that about yourself and about your culture, and just kind of recognizing that it takes tough guys to be so self-critical and being proud of that toughness. I think that has been very effective for the teams that I've been on in the past. And that's something I learned from leaders I've admired in the past as well.
No, that's really cool. I like that kind of mindset mentality that you talked about there.
Yeah.
Can you think of like any mistakes maybe you or your crew have made that have helped shape your philosophy today?
Geez, which thousand mistakes that I've made. The things that I have most regretted have been anything where I didn't do right by a person. Anything where I can look at and say that was manifestly unjust what I did in that situation. And such things have happened. I mean, those things do happen, and I could wallow in them forever, and that would be no good. Isolate them and say like, that was unjust. I should not have treated that person like that. I'm going to correct that, and I'm never going to do that again. And it can be something as simple as brushing by a guy whenever he's, sweeping and not being courteous enough to say, excuse me, because I'm really important, and I'm in a hurry. And really it's because I'm not thinking about it. I've got something important on my mind. I'm not thinking about saying, excuse me. But from his perspective, that's just me being very inconsiderate. And from his perspective, that might ruin his day, especially if there's a big rank differential. I'm several ranks above that guy, that he might draw all kinds of conclusions from that interaction, or what he perceived as an interaction, when I just perceived it as me moving from point A to point B. Recognizing all the conclusions he might draw from that, and that might ruin his day. That might ruin his week. He might, in his following watch, not make a recommendation, an important recommendation that would save the ship because he's pouting, or frustrated, or any combination thereof. So those are the things that I can most consider mistakes. And now, have I made tactical and technical mistakes? All kinds, you know. And whenever you move from making 10 important decisions a day to 100 important decisions a day to 1,000 important decisions a day, you're going to make more
Mhm.
mistakes.
Yeah.
That's part of the deal. And you gotta be able to deal with that. But the mistakes that I most regret are any kind of injustices. And recognizing that that's the kind of thing that most leaves me with regret helps me to, shape my priorities going forward, because I don't want to live with regret. So I think that gets to your question of, what mistakes have shaped my philosophy. That definitely plays into it.
Yeah, and those are, like, tough ones, like, anything done with people, and it's like, I think made me think back of, like, maybe those times at work, like, I came off a little standoffish or maybe was rude to a coworker. Those are the things in my mind that stick out to me as well, so it's like, I
Yeah.
can totally relate
You
to
gotta
you on that.
recognize that, just because I didn't mean to be rude doesn't mean it wasn't rude.
Uh-huh,
You and you can say all you want, like, well, they shouldn't be so sensitive. Yeah, well, they are. And you gotta deal with people as they really are rather than how you wish they were. And you're not you're maybe he is oversensitive. Oh
uh-huh.
well, he's your guy. And you gotta deal with that. Don't be rude.
So, submarines run on systems, routines, and trust. How do you keep teams aligned and performing at a world-class level?
Well, I've covered a lot of it with the culture, this self-correcting, just kind of neurotically self-correcting culture. Very rigid proceduralism, but that's only possible whenever you're resourced with, good procedures and good systems. And so that's kind of a luxury of the submarine force specifically, that we can be so rigidly procedural in our culture. But that drives a lot of things and how we operate as a team and how we operate within a machine that's extremely complex. If anything's not working like it's supposed to be, we adjudicate that formally. We don't have tolerate having some machine that, like, the light only comes on whenever you kick it a couple of times, and this light doesn't really come on when it's supposed to, but I know that, and so I'm just going to operate by memory and turn this valve as if the light were on just because I know it's supposed to come on. Like, no, no, we don't do that. Right. If we write special procedures whenever those kind of, we try to fix all that stuff as fast as we can. But you're gonna have material conditions that deviate from design. And whenever that happens, you make a new design and you adjudicate it formally and all those kinds of things. So that's really relevant, I think, to how we operate in that kind of unforgiving environment. But then the other thing is really, really leaning in to learn and teach and knowledge of the system and knowledge of the environment. On a submarine, knowledge is power, and kind of aggressively so, to the point that rank is almost, it's a formality. you it matters, and we're going to obey naval protocols and all those kinds of things. Someone who comes on board and starts throwing their rank around that they don't know anything about the ship, they're going to very quickly find that no one's going to pay much heed to what they think as compared to someone who understands the ship and understands the systems. And so we have all these different systems in play of qualification where you're constantly studying and constantly learning the ship. From the moment you're the juniorest sailor, or a junior officer, you've got a different binder full of stuff to memorize, but you're gonna memorize it, and you're gonna learn it fast. And being able to, follow hand over hand and follow the pipes and the systems and the wires and the cables and the hydraulics, and understanding how to isolate this and actuate that to combat a casualty or an emergency or something like that, fight a fire. Everyone needs to know what to do, and being one of those people that knows what to do confers a lot of status, and having that baked into the culture is super important, and I think is key to the learn and teach piece, because you're going to find a lot of satisfaction, a lot of professional satisfaction once you know enough to teach. and and the best way to learn is to teach. And so you have all these different self-reinforcing functions within the culture. So I hope that answers it.
No, that's a really good answer. I love it. There's I think so much that, like, people can take in from there, and it's especially when it comes to, like, running a team and that type of thing, like, it's so
Yeah.
thank you. So I'm gonna jump back kinda to your book here. What does being a warrior philosopher mean to you in practical everyday leadership?
So there's several like contingent pieces of that question. So what is a warrior? What is a philosopher? And it's how I use these terms. All right.
Okay.
So I specifically, when I say warrior in my writing, I mean a member of the profession of arms. I mean somebody whose business is war. That means people in the military, and it does not mean people not in the military. And like I don't dispute anyone else using the word differently. That's
Hmm.
just how I use it in my writing. And whenever I use the word philosopher, in that instance, I mean somebody who is deeply philosophical. I do not necessarily mean someone with a PhD. I do not have a PhD. I haven't had the opportunity. I've got lots of other training, but just not that. But I held myself to write on philosophy anyway. And, I think I do a good job of writing to an academic standard. But that's not necessarily what I mean when I talk about a warrior philosopher. A warrior philosopher in my mind is somebody who is a deeply philosophical and a deep thinking warrior, or someone who aspires to be. I don't think that there's any, it's an internal status or an internal identity. It's not something that, no one's going to give you a badge that says, okay, well, now you're a qualified warrior philosopher. No, that's not how it works. It's a lifelong project, which that's what philosophy is the love of wisdom and pursuit of wisdom and reason. I think that, there's a lot to understand there when it comes to the morality of the job and the weight of responsibility that plays into it. And there are, not everyone thinks this way. Not everyone in the military is deeply philosophical, but a lot more are than you might think. And so I'm kind of that's kind of the audience for my book is people in the military who are deeply philosophical, who want to think about their their place in the moral construct and their responsibilities within it, and how those things interact with one another. If that helps.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I have to emphasize, like, it is a never ending project. I don't go around, you know, touting myself as a philosopher. I'm a ship driver. I'm just, cosplaying over here as a philosopher, writing books, whenever I should be studying other stuff, probably. But these topics are deeply, deeply interesting and compelling to me, which is why I explore them. And, I hope in a way that I hope will be helpful to others, and I also have to emphasize, like, the book that I wrote it's not for everyone. It's not written to be a popular book. It's kind of heavy, and it's written for a very niche audience, and there's no excuse for it to be published because it's like a niche audience within a niche audience. It's just huge philosophy nerds that happen to be in the military. Which you've probably got one or two listeners that fall into that category, but yeah, I bet it's more than that.
I still love that you like to write and you actually found the time with, your busy schedule and being a father and all that fun stuff to
Yeah.
actually get a book out there.
It's very the writing process is inherently purposeful, and I think that is a really important thing for mental health practices. Journaling, just the act of journaling, is something that any psychotherapist will advise you to do, and there's very good reason for it. People figured this out thousands of years ago too. Whenever you read Marcus Aurelius, that's his journals, as he's and those are actual mental exercises that are prescribed, by the Stoics that that he was supposed to be performing as he's sorting out his own mental travails. So the process of writing down what you're thinking about, even if it's just saying this is what I did today, but the process of writing those things forces you to engage with your thoughts and to articulate them. And often you don't really know what you're thinking until you go to write it down. And you can't really distinguish between you might think you're thinking thoughts and really it's just a jumble of feelings until you go try to write it down. And try it, and listeners, I advise you, try it. Go, take that big jumble of feelings you got that you think are all these really deep thoughts, go write them down and see how deep they really are. But I promise you will learn something. And aside from just being frustrated at how challenging it is, you will discover the reasons that you think certain things, or you'll discover things that you think that you didn't necessarily realize consciously that you think, and that's why you journal. And I think that that is a very valuable process. And writing a book is just something that it's not something I was born able to do. It comes after years of doing other kinds of writing and a lot of practice at other things. And so, but it's just kind of a more refined version of that. It's still engaging the same thinking processes, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I have not gotten huge into journaling, but every once in a while I will pull out a piece of paper and just start writing stuff down just to clear my head a little bit. And
Yeah, I recommend give it a try to have a routine. Just say I'm gonna do this for a week, see what happens. Give it a
I
shot.
should, because it's like every time I write something down, I was like, oh, like I didn't know that that's actually what I was thinking. Because it's like what you said. It's sometimes it's just jumbled feelings.
Yeah. And like you don't need a fancy like leather bound journal. You just need a notebook, and like you don't have to do anything with it. You can just throw it away. You're not writing this for anyone else, and I promise you don't want to. No one wants to read your journals, and you don't want anyone to read your journals. That's for you, and it's the process, it's the exercise of writing. That's where the value is. It's not the record, you know.
Just a kind of a few more questions here. You've answered basically most of what I was going to ask. So, what lessons from submarine life and stoicism are you most intentional about passing on to your children?
Well, I think they're reinforced by submarine life, but they really are central to Stoicism. It's what is a good person, okay? One of the key ideas within Stoicism, we say virtue is the sole good in according to the Stoics. Well, what is virtue? Well, this is this is like you could do a whole other series of podcasts on this. But what is virtue? It's the quality of being a good human, and the discrete virtues are any kind of good quality a person has. Well, there are these ideas. There's basically four that are considered the cardinal virtues, and they are actually the Stoics inherited this idea from Plato, as did a lot of other philosophical schools and later religions did. You'll see that the cardinal virtues are deeply embedded in many world religions today. They are wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. And the idea behind those cardinal virtues, so to speak, is that the qualities of a good person don't reduce any further than that. They work like the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue, where any other quality of a person that's good is going to be some derivative or mixture combination of those four qualities. And they basically, I think that we really haven't been able to improve on that construct in describing what a good person is, although we certainly have tried. And so that is something that I emphasize to my kids. I write a ton about stoicism, and people say, well, do you teach your kids about stoicism? I'm like, well, I don't necessarily, they don't need to know who Epictetus is or who Marcus Aurelius is. They'll learn that later. Right now I'm like, all right, kids, cardinal virtues, go. Like wisdom, justice. Like, okay, what's that mean? Treating people right, okay. And that I find, no matter what you believe on a metaphysical level, that's something you can't really deny or argue with. And it's just something that's good that you can take with you. The other piece, the kind of more advanced piece from that, but that's the fundamental. And if they take away that, then I've at least done some part of my job. But beyond that is the idea that you're responsible for your actions no matter what. you know, and that's deeply embedded in Stoicism, is that nobody can force you to do anything. If you even if it, anything that you do is a choice, how you react, these emotions that you have, they're ultimately judgment calls. And your choice to assent to that emotion, or to assent to that judgment that you've been harmed whenever someone insulted you in a meeting, or whatever stupid thing that's making you emotional, you're responsible for that. Even if you can't stop yourself right now, you're no less responsible for that than you are for shoving a donut in your face when you can't stop yourself from that.
Hmm.
You're responsible. And even if, I mean, from the Stoic point of view, it's extreme. It's like my choice to live when a gun's pointed at my head and they say do this terrible thing. That's still a choice. On some level, I'm still responsible for that, which is, again, that's extreme. But recognizing that nobody can make you do anything is a very freeing, it's a freeing sensation whenever the world seems to be crashing down around you, and, lots of people believe lots of stupid things. There's all kinds of bad politics and you know, bad energy out there and bad ideas. And how could people think this? I want to get so upset about this. Well, they can't make me like that. you know, they can't. Nobody can make me think these terrible things. I am who I am, and I'm going to be that no matter what. And so, whenever my kids are, fighting each other or something like that, and then one of them yells like, "Hey, Eric made me hit him or whatever," and then the other kid's like, "No one can make you do anything." I'm just like, "Yes, all right." So that's kind of that's what I try to teach my kids, and that's how the philosophy informs them. And then as far as any things that Submarines has to do with that, I think it just reinforces all those. Like, that's an environment where recognizing, self-control and, teamwork, moral virtue, the interplay of all those things and the interaction of all those ideas, the coherency between them is just extremely important to the overall system.
I love it. And don't you just love those moments though where your kid says something and you're like, I'm getting through to them.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, "What wait, you listened to me? Wow." Yeah.
Exactly. So, kind of one generalized question here and then a couple follow-ups. What do you feel is the biggest stigma when it comes to mental health?
I think, I can speak from my own experience as most recently as an executive officer of a ship, trying to run a ship, trying to keep the crew healthy, but trying to keep the crew whole. There's a lot of stigma attached with, if I'm going to seek treatment, that's going to remove me from the team. And I don't want that. And I think that there's truth to it, but there's a lot of danger in that too, and it's a very, very tough problem. Okay, because people don't want to seek treatment if they need it, often because they don't want to be viewed as trying to get out of work. At the same time, if a guy slips off to treatment, and the mental health complex says that, like, hey, this guy can't go to sea with you anymore, we lose that guy and we're probably not going to get a replacement for another 6 months. That's going to hurt, you know, and other people are going to have to pick up his workload. It's not a myth, it's going to suck. And that's just a thing that you have to deal with. But dealing with that does not mean that you go and you say, like, well, I don't need treatment. I'm fine, whenever you're not fine. That's like driving on a flat tire. Well, like, it's a it's a it's a logical fallacy to think like, well, I'll go to mental health treatment whenever it's convenient, or whenever there's time. Like, well, that's not really how this works. If you're not stable and you're not safe, then we need to get you checked out, and we will deal with that. And I'm not saying it's not going to suck. I'm just saying that it's going to suck less than the alternative, which is to have someone not get treatment that needs it. And so, anyway, that I think the fear of letting down the team is a massive stigma to when it comes to mental health.
I could see it because someone that's been treated for mental health, it's almost the fear of like letting down anybody
Yeah.
just because, and you don't want to be known as that crazy person or because it's like it's almost like you get labeled by what you are going to therapy for.
Yeah. Who wants a label?
Yeah. Right?
If I could get through life without this thing, then perhaps I would like to.
That's another topic of itself, though. We have too many labels on things in society nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I'm no good. I'm no better a social commentator than I am a, psychologist, but I don't disagree with you at all on that.
So where can people find you?
So the book is Stoicism as a Warrior Philosophy. It is available anywhere you get books, which, for as weird of a book as it is, I'm surprised about that, but I'm pleasantly surprised. It's But I also have a website, williamcspears.com. And, I write other stuff, essays and, articles and stuff like that, mostly with relevance to military interest stuff. But that's a place where you can find me. I'm also easily found on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to have more connections there. That's just kind of where in the social media space I'm most active. I'm easily found there.
And last thing here is we covered a lot of topics. Is there anything that we did not discuss that you would like to bring up?
One thing, well, I've got a just kind of a signature idea that helps me a lot. Sorting things, and it's a philosophical idea, and that is the appeal to coherency, and basically finding what ideas work together well is a good test of the validity of a set of ideas, or the validity of some other idea that's out there, and whether it's compatible with the things you already believe or not is a excellent test for whether it is a valid idea or not. It was expressed really well by a guy named Cicero in the expression, that which is good or that which is honorable is useful. And it comes from, he was basically playing off of Socrates. Socrates, like hundreds of years before Cicero, doing the Socrates thing, walking around asking impossible questions, was exploring the idea of what is good. And his dialogue came around to the conclusion, that what is good is that which is honorable and useful. Cicero built on that and said, well, if we really understand, then we know that that which is honorable is useful, and that which is useful is honorable. It's not just honorable and useful. If you are truly one, you are the other as well. And that is an expression of coherency. And I find that to be a very useful sorting mechanism for, moral dilemmas and, professional dilemmas, or whatever kind of dilemma is. If it's not honorable, it may appear useful, but in the long run, it's not going to be, and it's going to, have regret attached to it. So, and I find that helps me get through life, and without regret. So I'll leave the listeners with that.
I I love it. Well, William, thank you so much for spending an hour with me.
Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate being here, man.
And most importantly, thank you for your service and what you do for this country.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Travis. Hey, one thing I do need to say, I'm supposed to say it at the beginning, but I forgot. Everything I do say here is just my own opinion. It's just me. It's not an expression of the Navy or any element of the U.S. government. It's just me as a citizen here talking. That's all.
Thanks again, and thanks to all the listeners out there. Please hit that subscribe button. If I could speak, it's Monday, so you can find us on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again. Until
All
next
right,
time.
Travis. Thank you much. Take care.